Good evening, everyone. Welcome back for another week's message. Thanks for joining. Today, we're going to wrap up our series that we've been talking about in regards to King Saul. We started off, then we talked about King David, and now we're going to talk about one more king, and that's going to be King Solomon. And with that, we'll wrap up our series of those stories that were in the Old Testament. And then we'll just see in what direction God leads us from there. So talking about Solomon's wisdom, before we go into that story in the Bible, I want to just have a general conversation as to what is wisdom? What comes to your mind when you think of that? And then what's the difference between knowledge and wisdom? And so those were questions I had, and I just went ahead and I searched it on Google, and I came across a website called yourdictionary.com. And so it kind of broke it down, and that's what I want to share with you this evening. And so that website defines knowledge as this. It says knowledge is defined as what is learned. So it's a familiarity with facts or certain subjects. So knowledge is what you get when you go to school. And for all those of you who are enrolled in high school and junior high and in college, you are constantly getting knowledge every time you sit in your class. Knowledge, it says, typically deals with factual information that you've learned from school, from books, or other experts. That is what knowledge is. And so when someone says, wow, that person is really, really smart, usually what they mean by that when someone's very smart is that they have a lot of knowledge. They have a lot of understanding of facts, and they're familiar with how to solve mathematical problems. But what about wisdom? What is wisdom, and how would you define that? Well, wisdom, according to yourdictionary.com, it defines wisdom as the ability to know what is true or right. In other words, it's common sense or the collection of one's knowledge. You see, wisdom goes beyond facts. What it does is it requires you to pull together all the knowledge that you have. So the knowledge that you learned from school and from books, and you get your personal experiences and you put those together, and that is what wisdom is. So what's the difference between knowledge and wisdom? That's a question I had when I searched this. And here we see that knowledge is the information that you've learned, while wisdom is the ability to use that knowledge in a profound way. And basically, knowledge is a part and wisdom is the whole. So like in math, and they have that, remember when you're learning about fractions, they give you a circle like a pie, right? And then they cut up the circle in pieces, right? So knowledge is that part, like the part you shade in that triangle, right? It's like a slice of pizza. Knowledge is a part, but the wisdom is the whole pizza, the whole circle, everything shaded in. And this is a helpful diagram that was on that website that I went ahead and copied and pasted here for you to see as well. Another way to look at it is here's knowledge right here. And you're getting that every time you're reading a book, you're studying, you're learning in school, you're learning in college. And then because of all that knowledge and facts, you get an understanding of what it is you're learning, whatever that topic is. And then eventually, when you're able to use that knowledge, because you have understanding, you gain wisdom. And you pull in your personal experiences into that as well. So now that we have a better understanding of knowledge and wisdom, how does that relate to our story? And let's see. So as we ended our story last week, if you remember, David's baby that he had with Bathsheba had died. It was part of his consequence for the sin that he had committed. But that last verse gave us a little bit of hope. And that's what we're retouching here. It says, verse 24 said, then David, after the baby had died, he went to Bathsheba and he comforted his wife and he slept with her. And then she became pregnant again, and she gave birth to a son. Well, guess what they named that son? David named him Solomon. And so we're going to now flash forward, because we don't have time to go through all those chapters, now to First King chapter 2, verse 10. We flash forward. Solomon is an adult. King David is an old king now. And we're going to see here in verse 10 that David passes away. Verse 10 tells us, then David died and was buried with his ancestors in the city of David, which is also known as Jerusalem. Verse 11, David had reigned over Israel for 40 years. Well, now, verse 12, Solomon is the one who's the next heir to the throne. Solomon became the king, and he sat on the same throne of David, his father, and his kingdom was firmly established. And so now we're going to learn about Solomon and how did he act when he was king, and what did he do when God appeared to him. And you can find this story in 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 1 through 15. So let's go ahead and read together. Verse 1, Solomon loved the Lord and followed all the decrees of his father David. Solomon too offered sacrifices, because that's what you had to do back then, and he burned incense at the local places of worship. Well, the most important of these places of worship was a city called Gibeon. And so King Solomon went there and he sacrificed 1,000 burnt offerings. Well, while he's there at Gibeon, verse 5 tells us, that night, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream. And here's what God tells Solomon in the dream. God asks him, what do you want? Ask, and I will give it to you. Wow, imagine if you had a dream and God asked you, what do you want? Anything in the world. What would you want? What would you say? Well, let's see how Solomon replies. Verse 6 tells us that Solomon replied, you showed great and faithful love to your servant, my father David, because he was honest and true and faithful to you, and you have continued to show this great and faithful love to him today by giving him a son to sit on his throne, which is me, basically. He says, verse 7, now, here's what he asks God, O Lord, my God, you have made me king instead of my father David, but I am like a little child who doesn't know his way around. And here I am in the midst of your own chosen people, a nation so great and numerous they cannot be counted. Verse 9. So here's what he asks. Give me an understanding heart so that I can govern your people well and know the difference between right and wrong. For who by himself is able to govern this great people of yours? Verse 10. The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for wisdom. So God replied, because you've asked for wisdom in governing my people with justice, and you haven't asked for a long life or wealth or even the death of your enemies, I will give you what you asked for. I will give you a wise and understanding heart, such as no one else has had or ever will have. Verse 13, and I will also give you what you did not ask for, riches and fame. No other king in all the world will be compared to you for the rest of your life. And if you follow me, and if you obey my decrees and my commands as your father David did, then I will also give you a long life. Verse 15, then Solomon woke up from his dream, and he realized it had been a dream. But God giving Solomon wisdom wasn't just a dream. It actually happened. It was a real event. And God, in fact, gave Solomon wisdom. And we'll see that. In 1 Kings chapter 4, verses 29 through 34, the Bible tells us that God gave Solomon very great wisdom and understanding and knowledge as vast as the sands of the seashore. Verse 30 tells us, in fact, Solomon's wisdom exceeded that of all the wise men of the East and all the wise men of Egypt. He was wiser than anyone else. And because of that, because of how wise he was, his fame spread throughout all the surrounding nations. And then we have some specific examples that show us how smart and how wise Solomon was. Verse 32 tells us he composed 3,000 proverbs. And you can find all of those proverbs in a specific book in the Old Testament called the Book of Proverbs. And in the Book of Proverbs, you can see all these wise sayings. A lot of them are actually pretty famous that people will just say generally. You'd be able to find them. Well, those were all written by Solomon. And you can also find that here it tells us that Solomon wrote 1,005 songs. That's a lot. But it didn't stop there. Solomon was also so smart that he could speak with authority about all kinds of plants, from the great cedar of Lebanon to the tiny hyssop that grows from cracks in a wall. Solomon also had a bunch of knowledge about animals. He could speak about animals, about birds, small creatures, and fish. And so he had all this animal plant science knowledge, all the stuff you learn in like biology or freshman year or that class called that plant science or something like that. Solomon had all that information all in his head. And so because he was so wise, we see here in verse 34 that kings from all over the nations, from everywhere else, they come and they would send their ambassadors to go talk to Solomon, to go listen to the wisdom that Solomon had to offer. So we're going to take a break right there from our reading, and we're going to break it down a little bit. So as we can see here, God gave Solomon wisdom. Why? Because Solomon asked for it. But why did Solomon ask for wisdom? It's because Solomon recognized that as a king, he was going to need God's wisdom in order to be able to rule his kingdom there of Israel. We see that in verse 7. It says, this is Solomon speaking to God. Now, O Lord my God, you have made me king instead of my father David, but I am like a little child who doesn't know his way around. And here I am in the midst of your own chosen people. That's such a great nation with so many numerous, they can't even be counted. And so Solomon knew that this was such an important position for him as king, and he felt like he wasn't smart enough to be able to do it. And he compares himself to a little kid who's kind of lost or just doesn't know their way around. And I know that feeling. Just not too long ago, they were remodeling Walmart there in Selma, and I've gone to that Walmart for years, but when they started moving things around the aisles, I didn't even know where to go. I just felt lost in there and confused, like where's the food aisle, where's this at? I couldn't find stuff. And so it reminds me of that, this idea of feeling lost. And so Saul felt burdened, but he's like, I got to be able to rule the people, and the best way to do that is to have wisdom. And so God gave him that. You see, Solomon recognizes that as a leader of his people, he doesn't have all the answers. And that's when he compared himself to a child who didn't know his way around. But here's the next question, how does Solomon ask for wisdom? He specifically tells God this in verse 9. He says, Lord, give me an understanding heart so that I can govern your people well, and so that I can know the difference between right and wrong. For who by himself is able to govern this great people of yours? And how did God react to Solomon's request? We see there in verse 10 that the Lord was very pleased that Solomon had asked for wisdom, because Solomon could have asked for anything. He's like, make me the richest man ever alive, or I want to be the most powerful king that has ever been. And yet he didn't ask for that. Solomon asked for wisdom. And so what else did God promise to give Solomon other than wisdom, since he didn't ask for anything else? Verse 11 shows us that God replied, because you asked for wisdom and you didn't ask for a long life or wealth or even the death of your enemies, God tells him, I will give you what you've asked for. So God says, not only am I going to give you a wise and understanding heart, verse 13 says, I will also give you what you didn't ask for. God tells him, I'm going to give you riches and fame. And God tells them there's not going to be no other king in all the world who will ever be able to compare to you for the rest of your life. Man, if God told me that, I'd be really excited, right? There's going to be no one like you. And whatever you do, it's going to be great. And not only am I going to give you wisdom, you're going to be rich, and you're even going to have fame for all the wisdom that you have. And so what that shows me, and it's a misconception that people have, that you can in fact be Christian, you can live a godly centered life, and you can still be successful. You can still be successful in the sense that God can bless you with riches. God can bless you, even if someone were to say fame, like people would know who you are. That just because you're Christian doesn't mean you can't be rich and famous. Now, you got to be careful though, because if you're rich and famous, it could distract you from your Christian life. It could cause you to compromise your values, but they don't cancel each other out. And I think that's why some people kind of get a misconception there where like, well, now that I'm Christian and I have God, I'm going to be poor and I'm not going to amount to be anything. And I'm not going to be successful from a secular definition. And I don't think that's correct. And you're more than welcome to disagree. But I think here it's clear that God not only decided to bless Solomon with wisdom, but he says, I'm also going to grant you riches and you're going to have fame as well, because he knew he could handle that. And I think God can use you or any of us and grant us all that if that's part of God's will. So let's move on. God promises to give Solomon a long life too, but that one's conditional. God says you'll live a long life, but only if Solomon does what? God says, if, first of all, you follow me, you got to follow me. And if you obey my decrees and commands, just like your father David did, then I will give you a long life. And that long life promise that God makes to Solomon is the same one he makes to us today. And so I broke it down here and I made it almost like a mathematical formula for you to see. So if you follow me, so God says, if you follow me, plus if you also obey my decrees and commands, what does that equal? A long life. And a long life, I think that's kind of an open definition. So like long life doesn't mean literally you're going to live to your 80 or 90. I think what a long life can also mean is a fulfilling life, because someone can live a long, purposeful, fulfilling life and then pass away in their 50s or 60s or 70s. I don't think it literally means a long life. It could be a life full of meaning and purpose, and whatever number that happens to be is just open and up to God. But God says you have to follow me first in order to have that long life. And two, you have to obey my decrees and commands. Well, what are those decrees and commands? Well, let's start off with the 10 commandments. And we just don't have the time to go one by one, but there's 10 of them, and you can find them in Exodus chapter 20. That's a great way to start. Follow those 10 commandments. But then in the New Testament, Jesus came, right? And the Pharisees wanted to see if they could trick Jesus or catch him into saying, they're like, well, okay, there's 10 commandments, but which one of those 10 is the top one? Which one's the priority? Which is the number one we all need to follow? They wanted to see if Jesus was going to say, well, number 3 is better than 7, or commandment number 1 is more important than commandment number 8. So they wanted to see if he would fall into a trap like that. They said, Jesus, what's the greatest commandment of the 10 commandments? And Jesus answered like this. He's all, there's 2 that you need to follow. And again, because of time, you would find this in Matthew chapter 22, verses 36 through 40. But Jesus said the top 2 commandments are this. First, you got to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And then he says, the second commandment, which is just as important, Jesus said, is to love your neighbor as yourself. And if you follow those 2 commandments, then you automatically would follow all the other 10 commandments, because you can't love your neighbor and murder him. You can't love your neighbor and steal from him. You can't love God and be worshiping other idols. And so if we follow God and we follow the 10 commandments and these 2 very important commandments from Jesus in the New Testament, God promises us a long life. Does that mean you're guaranteed to live till you're 80 or 90? I don't know, that's up to God. But what it does mean is that it's a long, fulfilling life, a purposeful life, a life that is full of meaning. It's not a number or a life that's measured in numbers. So let's continue on. Let's see here Solomon's wisdom in action. So we're gonna go right back into the Bible. I told you that Solomon was granted wisdom from God. And so because of that, he wrote thousands of proverbs and 1,000 songs that you can go and look and read in the Bible. But here, I love this story. You get to actually see Solomon apply the wisdom God gave him in a real life scenario. So let's go over the story together. Let's see Solomon's wisdom in action. You can find this in 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 16 through 28. So verse 16 says, sometime later, there was 2 prostitutes. They came to the king. They had an argument and they wanted the king to settle it. See, the king back then would act as a judge a lot of the times. So if there was the townspeople and they couldn't agree on something, they would go to the king and the king would act like a judge and he would make a decision. So now here we got these 2 prostitutes. They've got this argument and they want King Solomon to settle it for them. Verse 17, please, my lord, one of them began, this woman that I live in the same house, I gave birth to a baby while she was with me in that house. And then 3 days later, this woman also had a baby. We were alone. There were only 2 of us in the house. So the situation is you got these 2 prostitutes. They both had babies around the same time. One had a baby, and then like 3 days later, the other one has a baby. No one else lives in the house. And then let's see what happens. Verse 19, but her baby died during the night when she rolled over on it. So she basically suffocated the baby to sleep. Verse 20, then she got up in the middle of the night and she took my son from beside me while I was asleep. And then she laid her dead child in my arms and took mine to sleep beside her. And in the morning, when I tried to nurse my son, he was dead. But when I looked more closely in the morning light, I saw that it wasn't my son at all. And just like in court, when you watch like Judge Judy, the other person interrupts. And so the other woman interrupted, it certainly was your son, and the living child is mine. No, the first woman said, the living child is mine, and the dead one is yours. And so they argued back and forth before the king. And so here you have 2 ladies arguing that the live baby is theirs. And the other one is saying that the baby that's dead is the other one. So they're both pointing the fingers. And now Solomon has this difficult task of trying to decide who's telling the truth. Well, verse 23 says, here's what King Solomon did. Then King said this. He says, all right, let's get the facts straight here. So both of you claim that the living child is yours, and each says that the dead one belongs to the other. All right, then, he says, bring me a sword. So they went and they got him a sword. One of his men got him a sword. And I can imagine Solomon just takes out that sword. And here's what he says as he's holding the sword up. He says, then he said, all right, this is what we're going to do. The baby that's alive, that's right here in front of me, we're going to cut it in half. We're going to cut the living child in 2, and I'm going to give you half, and then the other woman can get the other half. Verse 26 says, then The woman who was the real mother of the living child and who loved him very much cried out, "Oh no, my lord, no, no, no. Give her the child. Please do not kill him." And Solomon probably smiled. But then the other woman, her reaction was, all right, let's do that. He will be neither yours nor mine. Let's divide him between us. So that was the two reactions of the two different women. And then that's when I imagine King Solomon smiled and he says, then the king said this, do not kill the child, but give him to the woman who wants the child to live, for she is his mother. When all Israel heard the king's decision, the people were just in awe. They were just amazed of King Solomon, for they saw the wisdom that God had given him for rendering justice. And so that's an amazing story. I like to see how King Solomon applied that. So how did he figure it out? Well, King Solomon, because God had given him wisdom, was able to think. A mother has what they call a maternal instinct. It's something that you can even see in animals, right? The mama bear who has cubs will do anything she can to sacrifice her, even herself, to protect her cubs. So if there's ever a threat, the mama bear will go in front of whatever that threat may be, and she's even willing to give her life in order for her cubs to be okay. And so a woman, a mother, has what they call a maternal instinct, this idea that she will do anything to keep her child alive. And but see that maternal instinct only exists between mother and child. You see, the other lady, she didn't care if they were going to kill this baby because she knew that her baby was already dead. And she just probably didn't want to see this other lady, her friend, her roommate with her baby. So she was totally fine with them killing the baby and splitting it in half. And that gave it away. That showed the king right away who was lying and who was telling the truth. Because the mother of the baby was willing to let her baby live with this lady, even though she knew it wasn't her baby. She'd rather see her baby live with someone else than to witness her baby be killed right there in front of everybody and split in half. And so I really like that story. It really shows King Solomon's wisdom and how he applied it. But our lesson doesn't end there. How does that apply to us? Well, I'm happy to tell you that we too can and we should ask God for wisdom. See, James chapter 1, verse 5 says, if you need wisdom, just ask. Ask our generous God, and he will give it to you. The Bible says that if you ask God for wisdom, he's a generous God, and he will give you wisdom. Well, how should I ask for wisdom, though? Ask God for wisdom the way Solomon did. It says, Lord, give me an understanding heart so that I can know the difference between right and wrong. You see, our lives are full of decisions that we make every day. Some of those are daily decisions. For example, when you wake up in the morning, you decide, well, what am I going to wear today? What's my outfit going to be? And then you decide, well, what am I going to eat for breakfast? What am I going to eat for lunch? What are we going to eat for dinner? Right? Those are daily decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis. We also have smaller decisions that we make depending on what we have to do for that day. Those are like our things to do. What's my things to do list? And I got to knock this out, and I got to do this, and I got to do that. Those are our daily decisions. But where we really need wisdom is for the major life decisions that we make. And throughout our life, we're going to come to different points and times where we have to make major decisions, life-altering decisions, changes and decisions that are made that might put you on a whole different path this way or might send you in a whole other direction. And before you make that major decision, it's so important that you ask God for wisdom so that you can make the right choice. Well, what are some of those major decisions? I put a couple examples here for you to get you thinking. For some of you that are in high school and you're coming towards being your junior or senior year, you might be asking yourself, so am I going to continue school? I don't have to go after I graduate high school, right? Or am I just going to work? It's a decision you have to make. If you decide you're going to go to college, then you have to decide, well, which colleges am I going to apply to? And you start having to do those applications, you have to write essays, there's a whole process. Then once you're in college, if you get accepted, maybe you got accepted to 4 or 5 different colleges. Now you got to say, well, what college am I going to attend? And you got to pick that. And that can make the difference between you still living in Selma, driving to Fresno State, or it can mean you relocating to LA or up to the Bay Area, or even out of state, like some of the people in our church have done. And so then you might have to ask yourself, once you're in college, all right, so what classes am I going to take next semester? And even some of you that are in high school, you get to choose, what electives am I going to do for next year? I didn't like that. I'm going to try something new, or am I going to continue the same elective all the way through? Some of you might be asking yourself, am I going to get a summer job this year? Where am I going to work, right? Where am I going to apply? You might even be asking yourself, should I stay in this relationship that I've been in? Has it been working, or am I going to have to try something new? Then you have other major decisions that you make as you get older and as you go through life. Start asking yourself stuff like, well, when am I going to get married? When am I going to have kids? When am I going to buy a home? Am I going to buy a home? Am I going to continue to rent? Am I going to move to another city, or am I going to continue living here? Those are all major important decisions that don't have an impact on you, but on your future family, and then on your close family and even your extended family. I mean, it just, as we talked about last week about consequences, it can have such different impacts and consequences on you. But before you make any of those important decisions, it's important, it's critical that you ask God for wisdom so that he can help you make the best choice for yourself in that moment. So this is another thing. That was just us asking God for wisdom so that we can make personal decisions that are going to impact us. But I want to point out to you here that Solomon also asked for wisdom so that he could better lead his people. See, Solomon said to God, please help me to govern your people well. And govern is another word for lead. And I truly believe that God has made all of us leaders. We're all leaders. You see, you can be a leader in your school. You might be a leader at your job because you're a manager or a supervisor. You're a leader in your home if you're the older child and there's a bunch of you. Or you're the leader in your home as the father or mother in the family, or the grandmother or the grandfather. Maybe you're the leader on your sports team. Maybe you're one of the captains. Maybe you're a leader in your extracurricular activities. And I gave some examples here, like in band or color guard, mock trial, or a drama club. Maybe you're a leader in your community, part of the parent club. You're part of the city council or the school board. Maybe you're coaching a sports team for the city league. You're also a leader in your church. You see, God has made us all to, at one point in our life, be leaders, whether it's at school, at your job, at home, or in different activities that you're involved in. Well, it's important that you ask God to give you wisdom so that you can lead people well, so that you can do your best, so that you can come together and make important and good decisions for the team and for those that are following. And so our prayer today should be this: Lord, help me to lead well. You see, Solomon points out that for who, he says, by himself is able to govern these great people of yours. Who by himself? None of us can. None of us can do it by ourselves. And that's why we need God and his wisdom. And so that basically concludes our lesson for tonight. I hope that you can see through King Solomon's example how important, how valuable it is to have wisdom, and that God allows us, he gives us the opportunity to ask him for wisdom. And if we do, God will give it to us generously. And it's important that you have this wisdom before you make life-altering decisions that are going to have an impact on you and your loved ones. You see, God kind of sees the big picture of our lives, and we just kind of see like a zoomed view of it, because we're kind of like, we just see today and tomorrow and just yesterday, but God has this broader view. And I heard someone give an example. It was something like, if you ever feel like you're stuck and there's no way out, it's kind of like a rat in a maze, right? That rat that's in the maze might think there's no way out, but the person looking over and looking above the maze can see, yeah, there's a way out. It's over here. And God is like that. God is looking at our lives from the top, and he's like, there are ways out. I'm providing them for you. Here's the way I want you to go. Here's all the great plans I have for you, but you have to ask for my wisdom. And when you do, you can go the right way, and you'll be able to find your way out of difficult situations. You will be able to find success in your life. And so that's why we need God's wisdom, because God is all-knowing, all-powerful. He is here today. He was here yesterday, today, and he's going to be here tomorrow and forever and ever more. And you have the ability to tap on that wisdom. All you have to do is ask God. It doesn't even cost anything. It's 100% free. And nothing in this life is free. Everything costs something. So take the time when we end this lesson to ask God for wisdom. Ask for his guidance in whatever important decision you're about to make in your life. And then trust that God will guide you, and he will show you through his wisdom what you need to do. And so with that, I'd like to end. I hope you're all doing well. May God bless each one of you and watch over all of you, always and forever. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.